October 10th, 2025, just after midnight, Indiana State Prison. A 53-year-old man was executed by lethal injection. His name was Roy Lee Ward. 6 weeks ago, justice was finally delivered, after 24 years on death row, for what he did to a 15-year-old girl on a summer afternoon in 2001. A girl who answered her door to someone asking for help, who showed kindness to a stranger, who trusted when she shouldn't have. That trust cost her everything. And what her younger sister heard from upstairs that day would traumatize an entire community, would expose a system that had failed repeatedly, would lead to new laws. But those laws came too late for Stacy Payne. This case will shatter your heart, and the recent execution brings an end to decades of pain. Before we continue, like, share, subscribe, and turn on notifications. What happened to Stacy Payne is a reminder that evil doesn't always look evil. July 11th, 2001. A Wednesday afternoon in Spencer County, Indiana. Summer break. Hot day. 15-year-old Stacy Payne was at home. Not alone. Her younger sister was there too, upstairs, taking a nap. Stacy was waiting to leave for her part-time job at a pizza place. Just a few more hours. Then she'd go to work, earn some money. Normal teenage summer day. Stacy was a cheerleader at Heritage Hills High School, played flute in the marching band, served on student council, made honor roll, volunteered at Bible school teaching arts and crafts. She was the kind of daughter every parent dreams of. Kind, responsible, active, loved, had her whole future ahead of her. By the end of that day, Stacy would be fighting for her life in a hospital operating room, and her sister would be traumatized forever by what she heard, what she couldn't stop, what no one should ever have to witness. That afternoon, there was a knock at the door. Stacy answered, found a man standing there, 29 years old. He seemed normal, ordinary, nothing particularly threatening, just someone from the area. He told Stacy he was looking for his missing dog, asked if she'd seen it. This seemed reasonable, harmless. People lose pets all the time. Stacy was helpful, kind, would want to assist someone looking for their dog. She didn't know there was no lost dog, that this was a lie, a predator's tactic, a way to gain access, to get inside, to get control. The man's name was Roy Lee Ward, and he was about to commit one of the most brutal murders in Indiana history. What happened next happened fast. Roy forced his way into the Payne house, pushed past Stacy, or threatened her. However it happened, he entered with violent intentions, with weapons, with plans. First thing he did was cut the phone lines, severed them, so no one could call for help, so he'd have time. This wasn't random, wasn't impulsive. This was calculated. Roy had come prepared, knew what he was going to do, and Stacy realized too late that she was in terrible danger. Upstairs, Stacy's younger sister woke from her nap, heard sounds, terrible sounds, screaming, struggling, violence. She heard her sister being attacked, heard something awful happening. The sister was terrified, didn't know what to do, wanted to help, but knew she couldn't, knew if she went downstairs she'd be attacked too. So she stayed hidden, stayed quiet, and did the bravest thing a child could do in that moment. She called 911 while the attack was still happening, while her sister was being hurt in the next room, while a predator was in their house. The call was frantic, desperate. Please come, please help. Someone is hurting my sister. Please hurry. Town Marshal Matt Keller responded to the call, arrived at the Payne house within minutes, weapon drawn, entered cautiously, not knowing what he'd find. What he found was a scene from a nightmare. Roy Lee Ward, standing there, holding a knife, covered in blood, and on the floor was Stacy Payne, 15 years old, barely alive, naked, covered in blood, her intestines exposed from the violence. The injuries were catastrophic, horrific, more brutal than Marshal Keller had seen in his career. He arrested Roy immediately, secured him, then called for medical help. For life flight, Stacy needed emergency surgery, needed doctors, Needed a miracle. The helicopter arrived. Airlifted Stacy to University of Louisville Hospital, the nearest trauma center. Surgeons were waiting, ready. When Stacy arrived, they rushed her to surgery. Worked frantically, tried to save her. But the injuries were too severe, too extensive. The violence that had been inflicted was too much. Roy had stabbed Stacy 33 times, had beaten her with a dumbbell, had caused injuries incompatible with life. Despite everything doctors tried, despite all their skills, despite fighting for hours, Stacy couldn't be saved. At 4:18 p.m. on July 11, 2001, Stacy Lynn Payne was pronounced dead. 15 years old, a cheerleader, an honor student, a volunteer, a daughter, a sister, a girl with dreams, with potential, with a future, all stolen by a man who knocked on her door asking about a dog. Roy Lee Ward was in custody, had been caught at the scene, with the knife, with Stacy's blood on him, with the evidence overwhelming. But who was this man? Police investigated, found disturbing answers. Roy Ward had a criminal history, extensive, over 50 prior convictions. 50, most for public indecency, sexual crimes, exposing himself, being a predator. And the system had let him go. Every time. Light sentences, probation, short jail stints, never recognizing him as the danger he was, never keeping him locked up, never protecting the community. And now a 15-year-old girl was dead, murdered in her own home, while her sister listened from upstairs, while Roy Ward did unspeakable things, things that would be revealed in autopsy, things that would shock even hardened investigators. Marshall Keller found Stacy's sister upstairs, safe, physically unharmed, but traumatized beyond measure. The child had heard her sister being murdered, had been powerless to stop it, had called for help, but help arrived too late. Too late for Stacy. The sister would carry that trauma forever, would relive that day, would hear those sounds, would remember being unable to save Stacy. This is what Roy Ward did, not just to Stacy, but to her family, her sister, her parents, her community. He destroyed lives, plural. Stacy's death was just the beginning of the pain. The community of Spencer County was shocked, devastated. This was a quiet rural area, where people felt safe, where doors were left unlocked, where neighbors trusted neighbors. This kind of violence didn't happen here, but it had. Roy Ward had proven that evil can exist anywhere, can knock on any door, can destroy any life. People were scared, angry, demanding answers. How did Roy Ward have over 50 convictions and still be free? How was he walking the streets? How was he able to knock on Stacy's door that day? The questions would lead to investigations, to policy changes, to new laws, but those would come later. Too late for Stacy, who was already gone, already in the morgue, already being prepared for autopsy, where the full horror of what Roy Ward did would be documented, would be cataloged, would be used to ensure he'd face the ultimate punishment, death, for what he did to Stacy Payne. The autopsy of Stacy Payne revealed horror that shocked even experienced medical examiners. The level of violence was extreme, excessive, brutal beyond what was necessary to kill. This wasn't just murder. This was rage. This was sadism. This was evil in its most extreme form. And what the medical examiner documented would prove just how much Stacy had suffered in her final moments. How much pain Roy Ward had inflicted. How much evil one human being could commit against another. Stacy had been stabbed 33 times. 33 separate knife wounds. Not quick stabs. Not hesitation wounds. Deep penetrating wounds. All over her body, her back, her neck, her torso. Each wound was intentional, deliberate, meant to cause maximum damage, maximum pain, maximum suffering. Roy Ward had taken his time, had stabbed Stacy over and over, had watched her bleed, had listened to her scream, had enjoyed her suffering. This wasn't a killing. This was torture. This was a prolonged attack designed to inflict as much pain as possible before death. One stab wound had penetrated deep into Stacy's neck, cut through tissue, through muscle, severed her trachea, her airway, making it nearly impossible to breathe, to scream for help, to call out to her sister upstairs. Stacy was choking, suffocating, while being stabbed, while being beaten, while being violated. The wound to her trachea would have made every breath agony, would have filled her lungs with blood, would have made her final moments even more terrifying, even more painful. Another stab wound had gone through Stacy's back, penetrated deep, cut through her spine, severed it completely. This wound caused instant paralysis from that point down, made it impossible for Stacy to run, to kick, to fight back effectively with her legs. Roy had incapacitated her, had made sure she couldn't escape, couldn't defend herself, couldn't do anything but suffer. These weren't random wounds. This was systematic violence, designed to control, to dominate, to torture. Roy Ward knew what he was doing, knew how to hurt, knew how to make Stacy suffer. But the knife wasn't the only weapon Roy used that day. He'd found a dumbbell in the Payne house. Heavy, metal, the kind used for exercise, for building strength. Roy used it for something else. Used it as a bludgeon. Used it to beat Stacy, repeatedly, violently. The autopsy documented 18 separate blunt force trauma injuries. 18 times Roy had struck Stacy with that dumbbell, or with his fists, or with both. The injuries were extensive. On her head, causing skull fractures, brain trauma. On her body, breaking ribs, damaging internal organs, causing massive internal bleeding. Some of these blunt force injuries were in Stacy's vaginal area. Roy had beaten her there, had struck her there with the dumbbell or with his fists, had caused terrible damage, terrible pain, injuries that showed rage, that showed hatred toward women, that showed sexual sadism. This level of violence in that area wasn't about killing, was about degradation, about violation, about destroying Stacy in the most intimate and painful way possible. Roy Ward wasn't just taking Stacy's life, was destroying her dignity, her humanity, everything she was. The medical examiner also documented evidence of sexual assault. Stacy had been raped, violently, brutally. The injuries proved it beyond any doubt. Lacerations, tears, trauma, internal damage. Roy had sexually assaulted Stacy during the attack, either before he started stabbing her, or while she was dying, or both. The timeline wasn't entirely clear, but the evidence was undeniable. Roy Ward had raped this 15-year-old girl, had violated her in the worst possible way, while murdering her, while her younger sister was hiding upstairs listening to everything, while Stacy fought for her life. The depravity was absolute, the evil complete. There are no words adequate to describe what Roy Ward did to Stacy Payne. The medical examiner determined the cause of death was the stab wounds, the blood loss, the trauma from 33 knife injuries. Stacy had bled extensively, massively, had lost too much blood to survive. Even with immediate medical attention, even with the helicopter, even with the trauma surgeons at University of Louisville Hospital, even with everything doctors tried, the damage was too severe, too extensive. Roy Ward had made sure of that, had stabbed her 33 times, had destroyed vital organs, had caused injuries incompatible with life. Stacy never had a chance from the moment Roy Ward entered her house with that knife. But the autopsy did more than document Stacy's injuries. It also collected critical evidence, evidence that would prove Roy's guilt. DNA, biological material, from under Stacy's fingernails where she'd fought back, where she'd scratched at Roy, clawed at him, tried desperately to defend herself. The skin cells under her nails would be tested, would be matched to Roy Lee Ward, would prove he'd been in physical contact with Stacy during the attack. More DNA was collected from Stacy's body, from the sexual assault, from the rape. This evidence would be analyzed, would be compared to Roy's DNA, would prove scientifically that Roy Ward had raped Stacy Payne, that he'd murdered her, that he'd committed these evil acts. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable, irrefutable. While the medical examiner worked on Stacy's body, police investigated Roy Lee Ward's background. Who was this man? What was his history? Had there been warning signs? Red flags? Things that should have prevented this? The answers they found were disturbing, infuriating, enraging. Roy Ward had a criminal record. Not a small one. Not a few minor offenses. An extensive record. Over 50 prior convictions. 50 separate times Roy Ward had been arrested, charged, convicted, and then released, let back into society, given another chance, given opportunity to hurt someone else, to escalate, to eventually murder. The system had failed repeatedly, had failed catastrophically, and Stacy Payne had paid the price. 25 of Roy's 50 convictions were for public indecency. 25 times. 25 separate occasions when Roy Ward had been caught exposing himself in public. Masturbating where people could see. Engaging in lewd sexual behavior. Shocking victims. Violating their sense of safety. These weren't harmless pranks. Weren't victimless crimes. These were acts of sexual aggression. Of boundary violation. Of predatory behavior. These were warning signs. Red flags. Evidence that Roy Ward was a sexual predator who would escalate, who would progress from exposing himself to touching victims to rape to murder. This is a known pattern, a documented progression, and Roy Ward followed it perfectly, and the system ignored every single warning. The sentences Roy received for these 25 public indecency convictions were a joke. Probation mostly, a few days in jail here and there, small fines, slaps on the wrist, nothing serious, nothing that kept Roy locked up, nothing that protected the community, nothing that recognized the danger. Judges treated these crimes as minor offenses, as embarrassing but not serious, as nuisance behavior. They were wrong, catastrophically wrong. Public indecency by repeat offenders is predatory behavior, is escalation, is evidence of someone who will hurt people, who will rape, who will murder. The judges should have known this, should have imposed serious sentences, should have kept Roy Ward locked up, should have protected Stacy Payne. But they didn't, and now she was dead. Roy Ward also had other convictions on his record: burglary, theft, drug offenses, property crimes. More evidence that Roy was a career criminal, someone with no respect for law. No respect for other people's property. No respect for boundaries. No empathy. No conscience. Roy took what he wanted, whether it was someone's television or someone's daughter. He felt entitled, felt the rules didn't apply to him, felt he could do whatever he wanted without consequences. And for 50 convictions, he was right. The system proved him right, let him go every time, until the 51st time, when he raped and murdered Stacy Payne, when the system's failure became fatal. In the aftermath of Stacy's murder, her family channeled their grief into action. They couldn't bring Stacy back, couldn't undo what Roy Ward had done, but they could try to prevent it from happening to someone else. They advocated, they lobbied, they pushed for change. They demanded that the legislature take repeat public indecency offenders seriously, impose real sentences, keep predators locked up, protect children, protect communities. The family's advocacy led to new legislation. Stacy's Law, passed in 2003, 2 years after Stacy's death. The law increased penalties for repeat public indecency offenses, made them felonies instead of misdemeanors, made sentences longer, made it harder for predators to keep getting released, made the system take sexual crimes seriously from the first offense, not the 50th. Stacy's Law was important, was necessary, was progress, but it came too late for Stacy, who was already gone, already buried at St. Martin's Cemetery, already memorialized. The law couldn't bring her back, could only honor her memory by protecting others. As we go deeper, like, share, subscribe, and turn on notifications. What happened to Stacy Payne is a reminder that evil doesn't always look evil. July 16, 2001. 5 days after Stacy's murder, Roy Lee Ward was formally charged with first-degree murder. The charges were filed in Spencer County Circuit Court. Judge Wayne Roll presiding. Roy was in custody, had been since Marshall Keller arrested him at the crime scene. With the knife, with Stacy's blood on him, with the evidence overwhelming. Roy had no bail, would remain locked up, would never be free again. The question now was what punishment he'd receive. Life in prison, or death. The prosecution wanted death. The community wanted death. Stacy's family wanted death. Roy Lee Ward had raped and murdered a 15-year-old girl, had stabbed her 33 times, had beaten her with a dumbbell, had shown no mercy, deserved none in return. The case moved slowly through the system. Evidence was collected, analyzed, cataloged. Witnesses were interviewed, statements taken. The prosecution built their case methodically, carefully, wanted no mistakes, no technicalities, no appeals succeeding. This case had to be airtight, had to result in conviction, had to end with Roy Ward on death row. The community was watching. The media was covering every development. Stacy's family was waiting, hoping, praying for justice, for accountability, for punishment that fit the crime, death. By October 2002, over a year after the murder, the case went to trial. Roy Lee Ward was charged with first-degree murder, rape, and criminal deviant conduct. The trial was held in Spencer County, where the crime occurred, where Stacy had lived, where her family still lived, where the community wanted justice. The jury was selected, 12 people, who would hear the evidence, would see the crime scene photos, would learn what Roy did to Stacy, would decide his fate. The prosecution was confident. The evidence was overwhelming. DNA, eyewitness, caught at the scene, with the weapon, with the victim's blood. How could any jury not convict? The trial began on October 14, 2002. Prosecutor presented the case, called witnesses. Marshal Matt Keller testified, described arriving at the scene, finding Roy with the knife, finding Stacy dying on the floor, her injuries, the blood, the horror. Keller's testimony was powerful, emotional, made some jurors cry, made everyone understand the brutality, the evil, what Stacy had endured, what Roy had done. Stacy's younger sister testified. This was incredibly difficult, traumatic. The child had to relive that day, had to describe hearing her sister being attacked, hearing the violence, the screaming, being terrified, hiding, calling 911, not being able to save Stacy. The sister's testimony was heartbreaking, devastating. The jury saw the impact, the trauma, not just on Stacy, but on her family, on a child who'd witnessed her sister's murder, who'd carry that forever. Roy Ward had destroyed multiple lives that day. The sister's testimony made that clear. Forensic experts testified about the autopsy, about Stacy's injuries, 33 stab wounds, 18 blunt force trauma injuries, sexual assault. The brutality documented, explained, made undeniable. DNA experts testified about the biological evidence, the samples collected from Stacy's body, from under her fingernails, the matches to Roy Ward, the scientific proof that Roy had raped Stacy, had been in physical contact, had committed the crime. The DNA evidence was irrefutable, proved Roy's guilt beyond any doubt. The defense had little to offer, couldn't dispute the evidence, couldn't explain away Roy being caught at the scene, with the knife, with the victim, couldn't justify anything. Their strategy was weak, tried to suggest Roy had mental health issues, was impaired somehow, didn't plan the attack, wasn't capable of premeditation. But this didn't work. The evidence showed planning. Roy had cut phone lines, had spent time attacking Stacy, had made choices, conscious choices, evil choices. The jury didn't buy the defense's arguments, didn't see Roy as impaired, saw him as evil, as a predator. as someone who deserved the harshest punishment. On October 18, 2002, after deliberating, the jury reached a verdict. The courtroom was packed. Stacy's family present, community members, media, everyone waiting, holding breath. Judge Roll asked the jury foreman for the verdict. The foreman stood. Read the verdict aloud. We, the jury, find the defendant, Roy Lee Ward, guilty of first-degree murder. Guilty. The first count. The most important count. The courtroom reacted. Some cried. Some exhaled. Relief. Satisfaction. Justice. For Stacy. The foreman continued. Guilty of rape. Guilty of criminal deviant conduct. All counts. Complete conviction. Roy Lee Ward had been found guilty of murdering Stacy Payne, of raping her, of everything he'd done. The evidence had been too strong, the guilt too obvious. The jury had delivered justice, but conviction wasn't enough. The question remained. What punishment? The trial moved to the penalty phase, where the jury would decide. Life in prison or death. The prosecution argued for death, presented aggravating factors. The brutality of the crime, the sexual assault, the age of the victim. Stacy was just 15, a child. Roy had shown no mercy, deserved none. The community wanted death. Stacy's family wanted death. Justice demanded death. The defense argued for life, said death was too extreme, that Roy could serve life in prison, could never hurt anyone again, could be punished without being executed. But the argument rang hollow. Roy Ward had raped and murdered a 15-year-old girl, had stabbed her 33 times, had beaten her, had violated her, while her sister listened from upstairs. This wasn't a crime that deserved mercy. This was evil that deserved the ultimate punishment. The jury agreed. On December 18, 2002, the jury recommended death. Unanimous decision. All 12 jurors agreed. Roy Lee Ward should be executed for what he did to Stacy Payne. Judge Roll followed the jury's recommendation, formally sentenced Roy to death, plus consecutive sentences of 50 years each for rape and criminal deviant conduct. Roy would go to death row, would await execution, would eventually die for his crimes. The family was satisfied, the community relieved. Justice had been delivered. Stacy could rest. Her killer would die. Roy Lee Ward was sent to death row, Indiana State Prison, Michigan City, where condemned prisoners wait for execution, where Roy would spend years, decades, fighting appeals, delaying justice, trying to avoid the punishment he deserved. But Roy's execution wouldn't happen quickly. The appeals process is long, complicated, designed to ensure no innocent person is executed, but also used by guilty people to delay, to drag out justice, to cause more pain to victims' families. Roy would use every appeal available, every legal trick, every delay tactic, and Stacy's family would wait, would hope, would endure years of uncertainty, years of Roy still being alive, still breathing, still existing, while Stacy was gone. In 2004, 2 years after his conviction, Roy's lawyers filed an appeal, argued the trial should have been moved out of Spencer County, said community outrage made a fair trial impossible, said the jury was biased. The Indiana Supreme Court reviewed the appeal, and shockingly agreed. On June 30, 2004, the court overturned Roy's conviction and death sentence, ordered a new trial, in a different county, away from Spencer County, away from the community that wanted justice. The decision devastated Stacy's family, devastated the community. Roy Ward had been convicted, sentenced to death, and now that was overturned. He'd get another trial, another chance, another opportunity to escape justice. The legal system spent over a year trying to find a new venue, a county willing to host the trial, where jurors hadn't heard about the case, where Roy could supposedly get a fair trial, as if raping and murdering a 15-year-old girl deserved fairness, as if Roy had shown Stacy any fairness when he stabbed her 33 times. But the law required it, required the retrial, required starting over. Finally, Clay County was selected, and a new judge, Judge Robert Pigman, from Vanderburgh Superior Court, would preside over the second trial. The retrial began in May 2007, 5 years after the first trial, 6 years after Stacy's murder. The evidence was presented again. Witnesses testified again. Stacy's sister had to relive the trauma again, had to describe hearing her sister murdered again. Marshall Keller testified again about finding Roy with the knife, with Stacy dying. Forensic experts presented the same evidence. The 33 stab wounds, the 18 blunt force injuries, the sexual assault, the DNA, everything proving Roy's guilt. Again, the second jury heard it all, saw the photos, understood the brutality, the evil, what Roy had done to Stacy. On May 18, 2007, the Clay County jury convicted Roy Lee Ward. Again, guilty of first-degree murder, guilty of rape, guilty on all counts, just like the first jury, because the evidence was overwhelming, undeniable. Roy was guilty. Everyone knew it. The jury then deliberated on punishment and recommended death. Again, unanimous. Roy Lee Ward should be executed. Judge Pigman agreed, formally sentenced Roy to death. Again, for the second time, Roy was back on death row, back where he belonged, back awaiting execution. But the appeals would continue. The delays would persist. Justice would be delayed. Again and again and again. Roy appealed his second conviction. Of course he did. Filed with the Indiana Supreme Court. Argued the conviction was flawed. The sentence improper. The usual arguments death row inmates make. Trying to delay. Trying to avoid execution. On April 7, 2009, the Indiana Supreme Court rejected Roy's appeal. Upheld his conviction. Upheld his death sentence. Said the trial was fair. The evidence strong. The sentence appropriate. Roy Ward would remain on death row. Would eventually be executed. But not yet. More appeals would come. More delays. More years. In 2012, Roy appealed again. To the Indiana Supreme Court again. Same arguments. Same desperate attempts to avoid punishment. On June 21, 2012, the court rejected his appeal again. Upheld everything. The conviction. The sentence. The death penalty. Then, in September 2012, something significant happened. The Indiana Supreme Court signed a death warrant. Scheduled Roy's execution for December 11, 2012. Finally, after 10 years on death row, after all the appeals, after all the delays, Roy Ward would be executed. Stacy's family prepared, emotionally, mentally, for closure, for justice, for Roy's death. The execution date approached. The family waited, hoped, and then it was delayed. Again, about a week before the scheduled execution, Roy was granted a stay. Another appeal. More delays. The execution was postponed. Indefinitely. Stacy's family was devastated. Again, how many times would they have to endure this? How many times would Roy get more time? More appeals? More opportunities to delay justice? The answer was many. Many more years. Many more appeals. Many more delays. The system that was supposed to deliver justice, to execute Roy Ward, to give Stacy's family closure, was failing, was allowing Roy to manipulate, to delay, to extend his life, while Stacy remained dead, remained buried, remained gone, forever. In 2016, Roy appealed to federal court, the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals. More arguments, more legal gymnastics, more attempts to avoid execution. On August 26, 2016, the court rejected his appeal, upheld his conviction and sentence. Then in 2017, Roy tried the U.S. Supreme Court, the highest court in the land, filed an appeal, argued constitutional violations, due process, whatever arguments his lawyers could manufacture. On May 22, 2017, the Supreme Court denied his appeal, refused to hear his case, upheld everything, Roy Ward had exhausted most of his appeals, had fewer options, but there would be more delays, more legal challenges, more attempts to avoid the inevitable, death, for what he did to Stacy Payne. By 2018, Roy tried challenging the execution method itself, filed an appeal arguing that Indiana's lethal injection protocol was unconstitutional, that pentobarbital, the drug used for executions, caused cruel and unusual punishment. On February 13, 2018, the Indiana Supreme Court rejected this appeal too, said the execution method was legal, constitutional, appropriate. Roy was running out of options, running out of delays, running out of time, but still not executed, still alive, still breathing, while Stacy had been dead for 17 years. By January 2014, Roy Ward was listed as one of 11 prisoners on Indiana's death row. The state hadn't executed anyone in years. A moratorium had been in place. No executions. Death row inmates just waiting, living, existing, getting older, while their victims stayed forever young, forever dead. By July 2020, another report showed Roy was one of 8 inmates remaining on Indiana's death row. Some had died of natural causes. Some had appeals still pending. But all were alive, all still breathing, all still waiting. And so were the victims' families, waiting for justice, waiting for closure, waiting for the executions that had been promised, that had been delayed, year after year after year. As we go deeper, like, share, subscribe, and turn on notifications. What happened to Stacy Payne is a reminder that evil doesn't always look evil. By 2025, Roy Lee Ward had been on death row for over 22 years. 22 years. While Stacy had been dead for 24. While her family had suffered, had waited, had hoped for justice, for closure, for Roy's execution. Indiana had stopped executing prisoners for 15 years. A moratorium. From 2009 to 2024. No executions. Death row inmates just waiting, living, breathing, existing, while their victims were gone. The moratorium ended in December 2024. Indiana resumed executions, starting with Joseph Corcoran, a mass murderer, then Benjamin Ritchie in May 2025, a cop killer, and Roy Lee Ward would be next. Finally, after all these years, after all the delays, justice was coming. On June 27, 2025, the Indiana Attorney General filed a motion, requesting an execution date for Roy Lee Ward. The state was ready. The drugs were available. Pentobarbital, the lethal injection drug used in Indiana. The protocols were in place. The law had been followed. All appeals exhausted. It was time. Time for Roy to die. Time for Stacy's family to have closure. Time for justice to be delivered. On July 7, 2025, the Indiana Supreme Court signed a death warrant, set a tentative execution date, October 10, 2025, pending final legal challenges, pending clemency process, but the date was set. Roy Ward would die in 3 months. Stacy's family prepared, hoped, prayed this time would be different, that there would be no more delays, no more stays, no more years of waiting. Roy's lawyers filed one last appeal, argued the execution method was cruel, that pentobarbital caused suffering, violated constitutional rights, cited testimony about Benjamin Ritchie's execution in May, said Ritchie had made violent movements on the gurney, had suffered, that using the same drug on Roy would be unconstitutional. The prosecution responded, said Roy had no valid grounds, that the method was tested, approved, legal, that Roy was trying to delay again, manipulate again, avoid justice again. On August 28, 2025, the Indiana Supreme Court rejected Roy's appeal, finalized the execution date, October 10, 2025. Official, final, no more delays. Roy had one last option, clemency, a petition to the governor, asking for mercy, for his sentence to be commuted to life without parole, for his life to be spared. The Indiana Parole Board scheduled a clemency hearing. September 23, 2025. Roy could make his case, could argue for mercy, could beg for his life. Something he never gave Stacy, something she never got. Mercy. Roy initially was supposed to be interviewed privately by the parole board, but he declined, refused the interview, so the hearing would be public. Before the 5-member board, who would decide, should Roy live or die as sentenced? On September 23, 2025, the clemency hearing began. Roy's lawyers argued for mercy, said Roy was remorseful, had changed, had been diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, that this condition affected his mental state at the time of the murder, that he deserved compassion, understanding, life imprisonment instead of death. They presented medical reports, expert testimony, anything to save Roy's life, to convince the board to recommend clemency. The defense argued that Roy's autism had gone undiagnosed for years, that it explained some of his behavior, that it warranted mercy. But the board also heard from Stacy's family. Her mother spoke, described the devastation, the permanent emptiness, the holidays that would never be whole, the family gatherings missing Stacy, the birthdays that were sad reminders of what they'd lost, the emotional destruction that would never heal, 24 years of grief, of absence, of a daughter and sister stolen, by Roy Ward, who showed no mercy, who gave Stacy no chance, who deserved none in return. The mother's statement was powerful, emotional. She said, "Now our family gatherings are no longer whole, holidays still empty. Birthdays are sad reminders of what we lost. Our family has endured emotional devastation. Made clear the family wanted justice, wanted Roy executed, wanted closure after 24 years of waiting." On September 24, 2025, the parole board announced their decision. Clemency denied. The board cited the brutal nature of the crime, the rape and murder of a 15-year-old girl, the 33 stab wounds, the 18 blunt force injuries, the sexual assault, the lack of mercy shown to Stacy, the aggravating circumstances, all reasons to deny clemency, to let the execution proceed, to deliver justice. The board's recommendation went to Governor Mike Braun, who had final authority, who could grant clemency, or let the execution happen. On September 29, 2025, Governor Braun announced his decision. Clemency denied. He agreed with the parole board. Roy Ward had committed heinous crimes, had shown no mercy, deserved none, would be executed as sentenced. The execution would proceed. October 10, 2025, 11 days away, Stacy's family was relieved, satisfied. Finally, after 24 years, after all the appeals, after all the delays, Roy Ward would die, justice would be delivered, Stacy would have peace, and her family would have closure. On October 8, 2025, 2 days before the execution, Roy Ward withdrew his remaining federal appeals, stopped fighting, accepted his fate. Whether this was genuine acceptance, or recognition that he'd lost, or desire to end it, wasn't clear, but the effect was the same. No more appeals, no more delays, no more legal challenges. The execution would happen. October 10, 2025, as scheduled, as promised, as deserved. Roy Lee Ward would die for what he did to Stacy Payne. Roy also did not appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court for a stay of execution. The path was clear. Justice was coming. Finally, October 10, 2025, the day had arrived. 24 years, 4 months, 29 days after Stacy's murder. Roy Lee Ward would finally be executed, would finally pay for what he'd done, would finally face the ultimate punishment, death. Stacy's family prepared. Some would witness the execution, would watch Roy die, would see justice delivered. Others couldn't watch, couldn't be there, but all would know, would feel it, when Roy took his last breath, when his heart stopped, when he was gone, like Stacy, forever. Roy Ward spent his last day on death row, Indiana State Prison. Death watch. where condemned prisoners spend their final hours. Roy could have visitors, could see family if they came, could speak to lawyers, to clergy, to anyone he wanted. He ordered his last meal, a large meal, hamburger, steak melt, fries, baked potato with butter, 12 fried shrimp, sweet potato, chicken Alfredo, breadsticks. Roy ordered all this food, more than most people eat in a day, would eat his fill, one last time, one last pleasure. Before death, something Stacy never got, never had a last meal, never knew she'd die that day, never got to say goodbye, to her family, to her dreams, to her future. Roy got all these things, got time to prepare, got choices, got mercy he never gave. As the hour approached, Roy was moved to the execution chamber. Small room, clinical, cold, a gurney in the center, where Roy would lie, where he'd be strapped down, where lethal chemicals would enter his veins, where he'd die. Witnesses gathered, in adjacent rooms, behind glass, able to see but not hear. Stacy's family members were there. Some came, to watch, to witness justice. Others chose not to, couldn't bear to watch. Even Roy's execution. The media was there. Reporters, documenting, recording. This execution would make news, would close a chapter, would mark the end of a case that haunted Indiana for over 2 decades. Roy was brought in, strapped to the gurney, arms extended, IVs inserted, ready for the drugs, ready for death. Before the execution began, Roy was given a chance to make a final statement. Last words, anything he wanted to say, to Stacy's family, to the world, to anyone. This was his moment, to apologize maybe, to show remorse, to acknowledge what he'd done, to give Stacy's family some small comfort, some closure, some recognition of their pain. Roy spoke, but his last words were strange, cryptic. Brian is going to read them. That was it. Not an apology, not remorse, not acknowledgement, just a cryptic statement about someone named Brian reading something. Whether Roy had written something, left a statement, wasn't clear, but those were his last words. Brief, meaningless, showing nothing, no remorse, no humanity, just Roy Ward being Roy Ward, selfish to the end. The execution began. Pentobarbital was administered, through the IVs, into Roy's bloodstream. The drug is a barbiturate, causes unconsciousness, then stops breathing, then stops the heart. Death by chemical suppression of the central nervous system. Roy's eyes closed. He appeared to fall asleep. His breathing slowed, then stopped. His heart continued briefly, then stopped too. Medical personnel checked, confirmed no pulse, no breathing, no signs of life. At 12:33 a.m. on October 10, 2025, Roy Lee Ward was pronounced dead. 53 years old. Had been on death row for 22 years. Had been alive 53 years. 38 years more than Stacy would ever get. But now Roy was gone. Dead. Like Stacy. But Stacy died innocent. Died murdered. Died young. Roy died guilty. Died executed. Died punished. Justice was delivered. Finally, Stacy's family members who witnessed the execution left quietly. Some cried. Some were relieved. Some felt nothing. Numbness maybe. The execution didn't bring Stacy back. Didn't undo the horror. Didn't erase 24 years of grief. But it brought closure. Brought finality. Brought justice. Roy Ward was gone. Could never hurt anyone again. Could never appeal again. Could never delay again. Was dead. Permanently. Stacy's family could move forward. Could grieve without wondering when Roy would die. Could remember Stacy without Roy's face intruding. Could have peace. Imperfect peace. But peace nonetheless. The execution made headlines. National news. Indiana had executed Roy Lee Ward for the rape and murder of 15-year-old Stacy Payne. 24 years after the crime. After years of appeals. After decades of waiting. Justice had been delivered. The case was closed. The chapter ended. Roy Ward was dead. The coverage reminded people of Stacy, of what happened to her, of the brutality, the evil, the system failures that allowed Roy to be free that day, to knock on Stacy's door, to murder her. The execution sparked discussions about the death penalty, about repeat offenders, about public indecency laws, about Stacy's law, about how to protect children, about how to prevent the next tragedy. But for Stacy's family, the execution was simpler, more personal, less political. Roy Ward had murdered their daughter, their sister, had violated her, had destroyed her, had stolen her future, and now he'd paid, with his life, with his death. Justice had been delivered. Not perfect justice, not justice that brought Stacy back, but justice nonetheless. The kind that says evil has consequences, that murderers face punishment, that Stacy's life mattered, that her death wasn't forgotten, that Roy Ward didn't escape, didn't win, didn't outlive his crimes. He died, executed, punished, gone, and Stacy could rest, finally, in peace. As we continue, like, share, subscribe, and turn on notifications. What happened to Stacy Payne is a reminder that evil doesn't always look evil. The execution of Roy Lee Ward 6 weeks ago closed a painful chapter for Stacy Payne's family. But it couldn't erase the pain, couldn't undo the trauma, couldn't bring Stacy back. 24 years had passed since Stacy's murder. 24 years of grief, of absence, of holidays without her, of birthdays that were sad reminders, of graduations she never attended, of weddings she'd never have, of children she'd never raise, of a life stolen, at 15, by Roy Ward, who'd lived to 53, who'd had nearly 40 years more than Stacy, who'd breathed, existed, had experiences, while Stacy was gone, dead, buried, forever 15. Stacy's younger sister had grown up with trauma, with memories of that day, July 11th, 2001, hearing her sister being attacked, being murdered, being violated, calling 911 while it happened, being unable to help, unable to save Stacy. That trauma shaped her life, affected her childhood, her teenage years, her adulthood. The sister carried guilt, survivor's guilt, wondering if she could have done something, could have saved Stacy somehow, even though logically she knew she couldn't, knew if she tried, Roy would have killed her too. But logic doesn't erase guilt, doesn't heal trauma, doesn't make the memories stop. The sister lived with this, would live with it forever. Roy Ward had destroyed 2 sisters that day, killed one, traumatized the other, both victims, both suffering, one buried, one living with ghosts. Stacy's parents had lost their daughter, violently, brutally. No parent should bury their child. No parent should see crime scene photos. No parent should endure what they endured. The investigation, the trials, the appeals, the waiting, 24 years of waiting for justice, for Roy's execution, for closure. They attended hearings, court dates, appeals, clemency hearing, the execution, participated in the system, fought for Stacy, made sure she wasn't forgotten, made sure Roy faced justice. The parents were strong, brave, but broken, permanently damaged by what Roy Ward did, by the loss, by the absence. Stacy's mother spoke at the clemency hearing, described the devastation, the permanent emptiness, holidays no longer whole, family gatherings missing Stacy, birthdays painful, every celebration marked by absence, by loss, by what should have been. This is what murder does. Destroys not just the victim, but the family, the loved ones, everyone connected. Roy Ward destroyed so many lives that July day. Stacy's was just the most visible. The community of Spencer County was affected too, permanently changed. Before Stacy's murder, people felt safe, trusted neighbors, left doors unlocked, let children play outside unsupervised. Spencer County was quiet, rural, safe, or so people thought. Roy Ward shattered that illusion, proved evil exists everywhere, can knock on any door, can hurt anyone, can destroy any sense of security. After Stacy's murder, people locked doors, watched their children more carefully, didn't trust strangers. The innocence was gone, replaced by wariness, fear, understanding that safety is never guaranteed, that predators exist, that evil is real. The community would never be the same, would always remember Stacy, would always remember that summer day in 2001 when evil came to Spencer County. But Stacy's death also led to change, positive change. Her family's advocacy resulted in new laws. Stacy's law, implemented in 2003, 2 years after her murder. The law increased penalties for repeat public indecency offenders, made these crimes more serious, made sentences longer, made it harder for predators like Roy Ward to keep getting probation, keep getting released, keep having opportunities to hurt people. The law recognized that public indecency isn't just embarrassing, isn't just a nuisance, is predatory behavior, is escalation, is warning sign, and needs to be taken seriously, treated seriously, punished seriously. Stacy's law made that happen. Not just in Indiana. Other states looked at the law, considered similar legislation. Stacy's death sparked national conversation about sex offender laws, about repeat offenders, about how to protect children, about system failures. Stacy's law was her legacy, her impact, her life meaning something beyond her death. This wouldn't have been necessary if Roy Ward had been properly punished earlier, if the system hadn't failed, if judges had seen the danger, but they didn't, and Stacy died, and the law changed, too late for her, but maybe in time for others. Stacy Lynn Payne would have been 39 years old in 2025. If Roy Ward hadn't murdered her, she'd have graduated high school, gone to college probably, had a career, maybe married, had children, had dreams and goals and experiences, had a life, full, rich, meaningful, all stolen, at 15, by a man who knocked on her door asking about a dog. Stacy never got any of that, never got to be an adult, never got to find herself, never got to live, just 15 years, cheerleader, band member, student council, honor roll, Bible school volunteer, a good kid, who deserved life, deserved safety, deserved better than what she got. Better than Roy Ward, better than July 11th, 2001, better than dying in a hospital operating room from 33 stab wounds. Stacy deserved to live, and Roy Ward took that from her, permanently, completely, irreversibly. But Stacy is remembered. Her name, her story, her life. Heritage Hills High School remembers her. The community remembers her. Her family keeps her memory alive. Stacy's law carries her name, ensures she's not forgotten, ensures her death meant something, changed something, protected others. Stacy's grave at St. Martin's Cemetery is visited by family, by friends, by community members who never met her but remember her story, who want to honor her, who want to ensure she's not forgotten. Stacy Lynn Payne, February 24th, 1986 to July 11th, 2001. 15 years old, forever remembered, forever mourned, forever missed. The execution of Roy Lee Ward 6 weeks ago marked the end of a long journey toward justice. But for those who loved Stacy Payne, the journey never really ends. The grief doesn't disappear. The trauma doesn't heal completely. The absence doesn't fill. Stacy's family continues living, but always with a hole, always with memories, always with what-ifs. What if Roy Ward had been properly punished for his 50 prior convictions? What if he'd been locked up? What if he'd never been free to knock on Stacy's door that day? What if Stacy was still alive? Those questions haunt, torment, but have no answers. Just reality. Stacy is gone. Roy is dead. And nothing changes that. The case of Stacy Payne raises important questions about the criminal justice system, about how repeat offenders are handled, about whether light sentences for minor crimes make sense. Roy Ward had 25 convictions for public indecency. 25 times he'd been caught exposing himself, engaging in lewd behavior, being a sexual predator. And 25 times the system gave him minimal punishment. Probation, short jail stints, fines, nothing that stopped him, nothing that protected the community, nothing that recognized the danger. Roy escalated, from exposing himself to rape, to murder. The progression was predictable, preventable, but the system failed to see the pattern, failed to take Roy seriously, failed to protect Stacy Payne. Stacy's law attempted to address this failure, to make repeat public indecency offenses more serious, to increase penalties, to keep repeat offenders locked up longer, to prevent another Roy Ward from being free, from having opportunities to hurt people. The law was important, necessary, but insufficient, because laws are only as good as their enforcement, only as effective as judges who impose them, prosecutors who pursue them, communities that demand them. Stacy's law was a start, but more needs to be done. More vigilance, more seriousness, more recognition that sexual crimes escalate, that predators don't stop, that public indecency today can be rape tomorrow, can be murder next week. The system must do better, must protect potential victims, must keep predators locked up, must take sexual crimes seriously, from the first offense, not the 50th. Stacy's sister lives with trauma that will never fully heal. The sounds she heard that day, her sister being attacked, being murdered, being violated, while she hid upstairs, while she called 911, while she couldn't help. Survivor's guilt is real, is powerful, is devastating. The sister knows intellectually she couldn't have saved Stacy, that if she tried, Roy would have killed her too. But emotions don't follow logic, don't respond to reason. The guilt remains, the what-ifs persist, the trauma endures. This is what Roy Ward did, not just to Stacy, but to her sister, who survived physically, but carries scars emotionally, psychologically, forever. Roy destroyed two sisters, killed one, damaged the other, both victims, both suffering, because Roy knocked on their door that day. Stacy's parents carry grief that never diminishes. Time doesn't heal all wounds, especially not this wound, not the loss of a child, not this way, not with this level of violence, not with this level of evil. The parents remember Stacy, the cheerleader, the band member, the honor student, the volunteer, the kind daughter who answered a door to help someone find their dog, who paid for that kindness with her life. The parents remember, and grieve, and honor, and miss, every day, every holiday, every birthday, every milestone Stacy never reached. The grief is permanent, lifelong, a burden they carry, because Roy Ward murdered their daughter, and nothing can change that. Not his execution, not Stacy's law, not time, nothing. The grief remains, but Stacy is remembered, not just for how she died, but for how she lived. 15 years of life, of laughter, of dreams, of kindness, of helping others, of being a good student, a good daughter, a good sister, a good person. Stacy's life mattered. Her death meant something. Her name lives on, in Stacy's law, in memories, in hearts of those who knew her, in the community that lost her. Stacy Lynn Payne is not forgotten, will not be forgotten. Her story is told, remembered, honored, not to glorify tragedy, but to ensure she matters, that her death changes things, protects others, prevents the next victim. Roy Lee Ward is gone now, executed 6 weeks ago, 53 years old, lived 38 years more than Stacy, breathed, existed, had experiences, while Stacy was buried, dead, gone. But now Roy is dead too, executed, punished, held accountable. Justice was delivered, late, imperfect, but delivered. Roy died for what he did, for raping Stacy, for murdering her, for stabbing her 33 times, for beating her with a dumbbell, for showing no mercy. He received no mercy in return. The state executed him, ended his life, as he'd ended Stacy's. Roy's death doesn't bring Stacy back, doesn't undo the trauma, doesn't heal the pain, but it brings closure, brings finality, brings some measure of peace. For Stacy's family, for the community, for all who loved her, Roy Ward is gone, can never hurt anyone again, can never appeal again, can never delay justice again, is dead, permanently, and Stacy can rest in peace. Rest in peace, Stacy Lynn Payne. You were a 15-year-old girl who deserved life, who deserved safety, who deserved to grow up, to have dreams, to have a future. You got Roy Lee Ward instead. Got violence, got evil, got death. At 15, in your own home, while being kind, while helping someone you thought needed help. You deserved so much better, deserved to live. But you're not forgotten. Your name lives on. Your story is told. Your legacy protects others. Stacy's law carries your name, ensures you matter, ensures your death meant something, changed something, saved others. You are remembered, always, forever. Stacy Lynn Payne, a cheerleader, a band member, an honor student, a volunteer, a daughter, a sister, a girl who answered her door with kindness and paid for it with everything. You deserved life. You deserved justice. And finally, 24 years later, justice was delivered. Roy Ward is dead. You can rest in peace forever. Roy Lee Ward was executed for the rape and murder of Stacy Payne. Like, share, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to remember Stacy and demand better protection for all children. Stay safe, stay aware, and I'll see you in my next case.